There are no people in the future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Monday, October 18th, 2021. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out the Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out the Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts. Yes, indeed, right from our own backyards and from across the country. On Fridays, Sean Kitchen and I break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And you should also be checking out our newest show. Yes, the Wednesday show with Cyril Michaleko. Cyril's a progressive columnist from the Bucks County Courier-Times, the Intelligencer, and he joins me again this Wednesday. We've got a great show ready for you to drop on Wednesday. We drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And you know what? I think you'll actually find this week's show with Cyril pairs really well with tonight's show. We'll be talking about his latest column, Right-Wing Media Triggers Misinformed Right-Wing Rage. Yes, indeed. You can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Just head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. That's right. For the price of a good beer once a month, you can help keep the media in the movement in the media. You can also help out this show by heading on over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you'll know every time we go live. And share it with your friends. Right now, you're sitting there, you're bored, you're waiting for the show to start. Share it with your friends. Come on. We're also broadcasting live on Riverside.fm. You can join us on Riverside.fm, and you can call in during the second half of the show. Details on how to do that are down below in tonight's description in our YouTube channel. We'll also put a little link there in tonight's chat when we're ready to go. You can also join our Discord server to keep the conversation going all week long. Yes, indeed. You can tune in. And for more PA blah, 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 that's where I am tonight. For more PA-based progressive talk, you can tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. Look, wherever there's a stream, you're going to find Rick there. Subscribe to his daily podcast, too, as well. And you know what? Head on over to ricksmithshow.com for all the latest across all his platforms. The dude's got his show on KPFK in Los Angeles, WBAI in New York. He's got some great stuff happening on Free Speech TV, and new news is going to be breaking soon. I know that. So head on over to ricksmithshow.com for all the latest. You got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. Yes, indeed, the amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Yes, make sure you follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus. Look, it's Halloween, too, as well. Halloween month, like Scaretober, the Night Caucus, that's where you want to be. Follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus, and subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. And for all you gamers out there, check out The Game In. That's with two N's. The Game In is a Quakertown-based, black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything from retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops. You got it. And look, back to school time. Kids bring in the report card. They get an A. They get a discount. Want to make sure you follow The Game In. Go to their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game In. If you got a question about something, look for something hard to find, shoot them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out once again goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at Song a Day Man. That's with two N's. That's at Song a Day Man on Twitter. Yeah, well, tonight, you know, I am so freaking psyched once again to have Jordan Hopkins back on the show. Hopkins is a writer, editor, and independent investigative journalist based in Philadelphia. He's been covering the slimy money trail left behind the right-wing extremist slugs infecting our social and political networks. And I'll tell you, it's the kind of thing that just makes my heart beat so wonderfully. Listeners of the show, remember the last time we had Jordan was on the show, we talked about his article, A Party of Grifters, unpacking the grift at the core of the emerging Patriot Party and the rise of extremism in PA more broadly. Well, we're about 6 months out, and lo and behold, we have developments here in PA. Yes, indeed. Now, Jordan has been following the dark money trail once again, exposing the influence that right-wing extremist billionaires are having on local school districts. His article featured in Unicorn Riot a few weeks back now. The school board disruptions escalate, funded by conservative dark money, will be the focus of our show tonight. And you can check out all his great reporting at www.itsalienmuse.com. That's itsalienmuse.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at jhop_PHL, as in Philadelphia, jhop_PHL. And then after our break, we'll be taking your calls and comments, and I'll give you some closing thoughts. And if you want to call into the show, you can do so on riverside.fm. Details on how to do that are in tonight's chat. And again, I'll tell you towards the close of our interview. Well, with that, Jordan, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Kevin, how's it going? Thank you so much for having me back, man.
Oh man, I've been dying to talk to you ever since this piece came out in Unicorn Riot. I'm like, okay, I look at it, it drops, I read it, I'm like, Jordan, you got to come back on the show, man. Because as you know, I mean, we've been talking about this on this show with the school boards, especially over the summer. We got Cyril Michaleko, who's been covering this stuff too in Bucks County, and what you do is kind of like the in-depth kind of unpacking of the money trail really in this piece.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier that it was slimy, and it is definitely slimy work.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have to say, I have to thank you guys at, RC especially, because you guys were covering the school board stuff, a little while before I was, and your coverage was a huge inspiration in, getting this piece made. And so yeah, I'm just really glad that we can get this kind of information out in the open.
Well, I appreciate it. And we've talked about this before. I think we talked about this on the show last time, and this is kind of what the hope is, right? I mean, the hope is that we've got a network of folks that are kind of digging into this stuff, and we're going to find people going out and running it and running with it and doing the kind of digging that you're doing here. So, okay, so
absolutely.
Yeah, so let's kind of like set the tone here for a little bit. I mean, there's so much to unpack in this piece. Maybe just start with the broad strokes, right? Kind of what are you doing in this piece? Where are you going? And why did you find it was necessary to really dig into this money trail?
Sure. So at the core of this piece is about where school board meeting protests are coming from. Obviously we've all seen the news kind of popping up. You see, a viral video of, some right-wing parents yelling or a school board meeting being disrupted. And those are all, interesting sound bites, and it's curious to see it happening. But what I was really curious about was, what is the inner structure behind these like seemingly random events? And when you look at it, it becomes clear that they're not necessarily a series of random events. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And that, while parents might be doing things autonomously on the ground, a lot of it is actually being driven by these dark money donations from, pretty familiar right-wing billionaire foundations. The Kochs are involved, the Council for National Policy, which is, one of the most shadowy, slimy right-wing think tanks there is.
Indeed.
And some pretty familiar faces that, especially in public education, people like Betsy DeVos. It's an A-list cast of right-wing grifters that are making these moves in public education.
Yeah, well, and I like how you put it here, too, as well. You say, like, a complex network of shared influence ensures a steady stream of income for a wide ecosystem of right-wing influencers and parents group, funded by groups like the Council for National Policy, advertised by conservative celebrities like Michael Flynn, and enforced at the local level by a loose coalition of parents and militia members. This right-wing policy machine has focused all of its energy on the foundations of American public education. I mean, I thought that was one of the best statements I have read, literally, about, like, from the top to the bottom, right? It's not suggesting that it's just these people out there, these networks, but it's also these, loose networks on the ground that seem to be operating in synergy completely outside of public scrutiny and the kind of mainstream media networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little impressive, honestly, when you look at it from an infrastructural capacity in that way. Because what I try and talk about in the beginning of the piece is the origins of this kind of movement in the Republican Revolution, where like a lot of things were done in a similar fashion to take over, school boards and target those local elections. And what we're seeing now is kind of a natural extension of that policy that really gets into the ground roots aspect of it, the grassroots of getting local parents involved and stuff like that. And so, a way, it is that complex network of influence where you have money trickling down from the very top to groups that you might be familiar with, like Turning Point USA or No Left Turn in Education. And in turn, those people are the ones who are funding the actual on the ground work, making signs and paying for bus trips to school boards that they don't live in. It's everybody is working together in this kind of it's highly organized, but it's very decentralized. And I think that that's really important to understand in order to grasp what is happening right now.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you give the shout out back to like Pat Robinson and Ralph Reed and some of their organizing, because in many ways, especially Ralph Reed was really helped pioneer that model of kind of distributive organizing around a centralized project. And it does seem like, it's like a rebirth of what we saw back in the 80s and 90s all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a strategy that worked really well for Republicans in the late 80s and the early 90s. People like you said, Ralph Reed was what we ended up going with, but Pat Buchanan was a good example.
Absolutely.
Tony Perkins, who is now the CN involved with the CNP. These are all right-wing proto-Trumps, kind of evangelically aligned, who took control of these infrastructures designed to target school boards and turned that into Republican votes. And it worked really well for them in the 90s and broke a decade of Democratic congressional control. And so that's, if we want to be focusing on where Democrats broke last time and where Republicans broke through, this is the spot. This is a game plan that has worked really well for them in the past. And I see no reason why it couldn't work exactly as well this time.
No, absolutely. And the way I've been talking about it on our Friday show with Sean Kitchen was like, what we basically saw in 2009, right? In 2009 and 2010, we saw, Republican operatives, particularly the right wing, recognize that basically the Democrats had all but abandoned kind of state campaigning, right? They had kind of left that as a wide open and not paid a whole lot of attention to that. And so that's where we saw the Tea Party targeting, those state things. There was a kind of a vacuum of attention, at least, right? And political candidates and investments there. And so, okay, now the Democrats or kind of some of the folks in the progressive left start to catch up to what was happening there with ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, and so on. And so, but instead of like, okay, now we're betting down what's happening at the state level. Now we see it moving down once again to the local level, where once again that there's that gap. So, and I think that it's been at that ground level for parents, right, within the school boards, it seems really disorienting to, all of a sudden you find out that there's these QAnon aligned like school board candidates that seemingly have a ton of money, right, going into a race when most people have not even been paying attention to what's happening in their local school board, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the reason why they choose these targets. And I think that it has to do with the blowback that a lot of QAnon folks, especially, because I think that they're involved with this, received after the January 6 riots. I talked about it a little bit, but because the focus was so heavy on certain aspects of the right-wing community, I do get the feeling that school board meetings and local organizing became kind of a safer, more politically expedient way to get their voices heard, and it's decentralized in that way, and it makes it difficult to understand what's going on because there's so much to cover, and school boards, they, operate in different ways. There, you might see different types of news coverage. And so it becomes difficult to draw those larger connections. And that's why the right wing is doing it. But you also have, because there is not necessarily that grassroots connection on the ground, there are larger movements above them making those kind of connections within the larger network. It's really complicated, but it's clearly like a coordinated effort both on the top and on the bottom.
Well, and it's that kind of complicated network, which is why I found your piece in Unicorn Riot to be so important and kind of really impressive in terms of laying out these threads and, I don't know, pipelines really of funding. So, and I also think it's that those kind of networks and that kind of infrastructure that people really just don't understand, right? And not because people are dumb or something like that, but it's because nobody has been covering this stuff, right? And really understands really what's at work in the shadows. So maybe we can just kind of, dig. I mean, I know there's a ton in this piece, which, people just really got to go out and read the entire piece. I would bore everybody to Kingdom Come if I made Jordan go through every little detail that's in this piece.
No, you got to do your homework. 2,300 words.
Yeah.
Due tomorrow.
Exactly. But, first, maybe say pull on some of these threads, right? What you found as some of the kind of, so we can see some of that working in those pipelines at work, because you do such an amazing job here in kind of following that money.
Sure. And so I think that the most helpful way to look at it is from a top-down perspective, because what you're really seeing is 3 or 4 large conservative groups that are funding this. And it's a combination of think tanks and political action committees and familial ties at the very top. And so we'll start with the icing, and then we'll move down to the foundation. And so those groups, what you'll see there is the Council for National Policy, Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's organization. The Koch brothers provide funding, the Bradley Foundation. And you can look through all these groups and determine that, they are very well known for providing millions and millions of dollars to right-wing causes all across the country. And what you see a lot of that money coming into now is obviously the school boards, but also critical race theory. And that's a similar topic that, again, is way too deep to go into. But that's the top group, the people who are driving the policy. There's a great Right-Wing Watch piece about a document that was accidentally leaked by the Council for National Policy that detailed exactly how they wanted to tear apart the public education system and sell it to right-wing companies. And that is absolutely like the overarching plan. And so if you view it from that angle, like that's where the money comes from, like the hundreds of millions of dollars that doesn't get tracked. And then a level down, you have what I described as influencers. And like, that's kind of a broad term because it involves a lot of different groups, but Mike Flynn you would recognize as exactly the type of guy who has been pushing the school board stuff for months. He is a member of the Council for National Policy. He joined their roster like 3 days before January 6th or something like that. So he is definitely involved, but then there's also, Ron Watkins, Nicole Neely of No Left Turn in Education, who's actually a Delco resident. So they all kind of meld together. But then they are the ones who are pushing it at a cultural level. So they're the ones who are, going to on podcasts and talking about school board meetings, developing the strategies. It's kind of like the mid-tier middle management. And then underneath them are the people who are influenced by them. And that mostly means, what you would describe as grassroots, like the parents who show up, who have been, kind of Q-pilled or brain poisoned by like whatever they've been looking at on the internet.
Right.
And, you have them, and then you have like the right-wing militia types, the Proud Boys. Here in Pennsylvania, we have Pennsylvanians for American Prosperity Network, which is a similar group. And their job is to enforce that kind of right-wing bent in the school board meetings, which is why you see, YouTube videos popping up of these people yelling, building space for themselves, or like Proud Boys infiltrating these meetings or shutting them down. That's the base level. That's where the grassroots work gets done. So it really is like a 3-tiered system of how this money is coming through.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, as you were laying all that out, I started thinking about, you know what, literally this is almost the exact model of what we saw on January 6th, right? With the insurrection, is we saw the same kind of three tiers at work. And then you had, you know, the threat of violence that is kind of ready to go. And I think the fact that we're seeing militia members start showing up, like, you know, in Bucks County here, we got these 3%ers who are starting to kind of threaten school board meetings. They want to have, like, you know, tailgates in the parking lot. Meanwhile, on their private chats, they're having, like, you know, if we have to go and drag them out, like, and force the, you know, and force them from, you know, from the dais in order to take over the school board meetings, we're going to do that. And it seems to me, it's very precarious. This is, we're at a point now where violence has been breaking out at these meetings. And it's unclear where we go from here. You know what I mean?
That's Kevin. That's the real elephant in the room, isn't it? And I try and, like, I talk a lot as much as I can about it, because it's right there in the title. Like, the school board disruptions are escalating. Like, they are continuing to get more and more violent and more chaotic. And I think you're totally right. There's no reason for it to stop. There's no reason. And this is, like, what got me interested in this topic in the first place, is because, you know, you were starting to see these viral videos pop up. And it became, like, immediately clear to me, like, the grift of the right wing, like the viral video kind of tilt, where it's like, okay, you know, school board meetings are mostly remote now. Like, there's cameras everywhere. They're live streamed. It's, like, the perfect opportunity to, like, really get your message out there. And it's just, I think what you're going to see is more of this type of three-tiered structure of organizing, where, like, the money is kind of pouring in, but not in any kind of way that is going to get publicly reported. And then the real chaos is happening on the ground, where, you know, there's no incentive for these people to stop doing the things that they're doing, because it gets them clicks, you know, it gets them those views.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, and you see, okay, so I was doing, I was following some hashtags on TikTok, right, that were associated with you know, with some of these movements. And what was astonishing to me is that you're following some of these you know, these are, like, you know, kind of in between that, like, bottom tier and mid tier, right, of these influencers.
Sure, influencers, totally.
And they're cashing in on this stuff. I mean, they've got new merch coming out. Like, they're promoting, like, you know, hey, you need a tumbler with, you know, of, like, no critical race theory, or, you know, check out our new T-shirts that are saying, like, masks are for Nazis, you know, and things like this. And, you know, and these are young folks, right? I mean, so we're seeing it, like, even targeting, you know, that level of influencers. And it seems to me that there's never an end to the grift. Right. And as long as that kind of, like, you know, opportunity to cash in on really kind of, like, the, like, fundamental undermining and destruction of American democracy. I mean, that's where we're at.
And when you look at it, it's a capitalism problem at the end of the day, because
100%.
When you look at the structure of this business model, this is an investment for many of these large think tank corporations. They understand that if public education gets slashed, then they stand to make a lot of money. And that is a legitimate, you know, motive for what they're doing. But for parents on the bottom, you know, in between these influencers and the militia types, again, like, this is, like, the very small subset of these people that you can really feel for, is people who have been propagandized to this extent. And, like, what they're doing is making money off of it, but not in any kind of way that's sustainable enough that they don't feel the need to escalate it further. You know, when you're making money on merch and on, you know, Patreon and stuff like that, you know, give, send, go, those are not stable sources of income, like the amount of money that's coming in for, you know, like Charlie Kirk and Nicole Neely. That amount of money that is coming in for them is sustainable. And so it makes sense for them to make these decisions. But for parents who are making their money on merch, all they can do is escalate, because it's all that's going to send them more clicks.
Exactly.
And if that's how you make your money, you know, you got to make your money. And it's the only thing that could ever happen as soon as money started getting dragged into this thing.
Yeah, Emily is basically said, so Kevin, we heard the PA School Board Association left the National Association because the federal DOJ letter to investigate violence at the school board meetings. So it looks like there may be even some breaks that are happening at this point. So we shall see.
Yeah, and And that's, you know, what they want just as much as anything else is to cause stress in the system, you know. And I don't necessarily agree with if it's the same proclamation that I'm remembering where they talked to the DOJ, they were talking about invoking the Patriot Act and stuff like that. And, you know, those are things that are going to cause controversy in public school systems, which is what they want. You know, they want things to be as chaotic as possible, because the more chaotic it is, the less institutions have of getting a handle on it. And they don't want the institutions in charge.
No, absolutely not. So, okay, give me a little bit of a reality check here, if you will, right? Because this is when I find myself in these times, right? Kind of always feeling like, okay, is this too conspiratorial at this point, right? Or is this an accurate description of reality, right? So
sitting in the dark at 2:30 in the morning.
Totally, you know, you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, I literally last night I was thinking about, I was reading a bunch of stuff, went through a whole bunch of different articles, really focused on some of the school board stuff and trying to just get a handle on where to go from here. And like, I couldn't fall asleep last night. You know, it's like, I was exhausted and I'm sitting there, I cannot fall asleep because my mind's going like this. But, you know, so here's this scenario, right? You know, I look at very much this from a top level, right? If I'm looking at like, what's the plan here, right? And I'm just brought right back to like shock doctrine kind of politics. And I look at like the history of what was happening, both what you pointed out to, you know, in the 1990s about kind of the attempts for the kind of right wing to take over school boards when there was the big push for vouchers and all this. Now we know there's people like Betsy DeVos, like people like in the Bradley Foundation, their goal, right, is to get those public dollars, right, and shove them into religious education, private education, and for-profit education. Like it's an untapped profit center, right? And to put it in that kind of language. And, you know, it seems to me that this is the way to do it, right? If you want to fundamentally disrupt public education and, you know, simply defunding it isn't working fast enough for your, you know, for your ledger, if you will, then this is a direction that seems to be, you know, let's up the risk here to see if we can throw everything into chaos, right? And then hopefully that we're going to be the ones around to pick up the pieces, you know, and offer this kind of alternative. And I hate to think about it as direct as that, right? Like, okay, this is the plan. But these are, it seems to me, agents of chaos that are going to somehow profit off of the destruction that we're seeing in our communities right now. I mean, am I kind of too far out on the ledge with that?
And I empathize with that so much because I think I ask myself that question 5 times a day. You know, am I too far out on the ledge on this? And I think it's a complicated answer because, like, no, the United States is not going to fall tomorrow. You know, or public education is not going to be destroyed in a week. Right. But these are the decisions. These are the people who make the decisions who have that power to fundamentally alter public education. And Betsy DeVos and the Koch Foundation and the Bradley Foundation can afford to think on timelines of decades. You know, if public education is completely gutted 15 years from now, it won't be that different for them as if it had happened today. And I think that's like what we really need to focus on is that these fights, they have every incentive to continue to push as hard as they can. Something is going to break eventually, and it's going to be as bad as you might imagine that it will be, as long as they feel like they can fundamentally disrupt America's institutions. Because like that's what's happening is the public education is a pillar of our democracy, and you can see it from the way that it gets attacked. You know, they come after critical race theory because they don't want people to critically view their history in regards to racial issues. They come after, you know, creationism like they did in the 90s or evolution theory in the 90s because they don't want you thinking those thoughts. It's a point at which to access democracy. And if they can go after that, if they feel like they can make money attacking democracy through that perspective, there's no reason for them to stop. And that doesn't have the same consequences for them as it does for the rest of us. You know, that means something to us. I don't think it means anything to them.
100%. And that was just beautiful. I think I'm going to clip that little piece right out and like said that, because I think that is one of the most concise descriptions of kind of, I think what I feel viscerally, right, and I kind of see happening at a more macro level. As these kind of chipping away of this. So let me ask this. Now, this really wasn't, say, the focus of your piece per se, but a lot of what we're seeing here has been, let's see, inflected. I don't know if is the right word, but has been informed by what we saw from the Trump administration and the Trump movement. And because, like, look, we should be clear, like the DeVosses, the Kochs, the Bradley Foundations, everyone that you're mentioning in this piece, they pre-exist Trump, right? I mean, they've been around, they've been doing this work for a long period of time.
Absolutely.
And it seems to me what we see, what happened with the with the kind of Trumpism, if you will, is the willingness to go public with authoritarian solutions to kind of what we're seeing. And so what's your kind of like, when you're sitting back, you're thinking about these two pieces, right? You're seeing this kind of assault and this money train that is going attacking these public education at the school boards, and what we saw during the Trump administration. I mean, how do you put those pieces together?
I think that's a really good question, because when you are looking at, especially a right-wing extremism in a more broad sense, not necessarily in terms of like militia groups, but in terms of conservative extremism, what you see is that when you're coming at it from the perspective of what is the state's role as a right-wing institution in pushing these policies and stuff like that, it operates as an extra arm for the right-wing movement. And you see that with Trump putting Betsy DeVos in charge of the Department of Education, because that is something that works for her in terms of her long-term plans. Left-wing activists, I think, routinely run into resistance from the state and from right-wing activists. And it's just something that they kind of have to deal with. But right-wing activists, when the right wing is in power, they are more often helped than not by the state. And so it creates that kind of like helpless feeling of, oh my God, it's like a two-front battle almost. But I think that it's important to kind of like target your planning long term and not necessarily try and hyper focus too much on the terrible things that are happening right now, because just like their plan of overthrowing the right way, the public education sphere or whatever, it has a bunch of little parts. The left wing counter movement has a bunch of little parts too, and they add up much more quickly than people would imagine. And so it's important to not necessarily have that kind of helplessness, I think, but like it is pervasive for sure.
Well, it is. And I think, but you know what, I'm always reminded when because I'm in Bucks County, right? I'm in the Penridge School District, which has really been, one of the, pardon the expression, but my censor daughter is down here, so I won't use the language I was about to use. But the kind of
use our imagination.
Yeah. So the off the railsness, let's put it that way, of our school board here has been front and center. I mean, it's been getting statewide and now national attention to what's actually happening in Penridge. So I'm kind of like living it. And there's a bunch of parents and community members who have been really trying to organize. Around obviously the election. We have November 2nd is the election for school boards that is coming up. So it's kind of organized around this. And it does seem that, people are really doing just fantastic organizing at the kind of the very local and micro level. And, I can't help but think, I don't want to take us into this like philosophical realm and stuff like this, but there's, Hart and Negri's got the book Empire, right? And then they talk about it in Empire about how, the local rises to the level of the global, right? At this particular moment, and that phrase has always stuck with me. And I see that these like school boards, right, are a perfect example of this, because the way to go after them is not to kind of wait till we have a giant movement capable of taking on all this kind of top tier, as you put it, the icing on the cake of this distribution, but is rather kind of through the local organizing that we're seeing in communities, right? It seems to me that that's where these, I think the seeds of a possible powerful pushback are there. So I'm curious. I mean, again, I hate to keep on pushing you beyond the piece that you're writing here, but I am really curious if you're thinking about these strategies of pushback. Are you seeing examples of where there does seem to be some resistance or organizing that has some hope that kind of gets us out of this, as you said, this kind of hopelessness?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that it's beyond the purview of the article either, because it was kind of the purpose of the article, which is,
good point.
I think that, no, totally. And I think that you brought up a great point that way, because when I look at school boards now, I actually spent the weekend in Delco, hanging out with some school board candidates and talking to them and trying to get an idea of what the race looked like. And I think that what we really just have to internalize as organizers is exactly what you said, that all politics is local. We have to more broadly than just focusing on okay, this is the school board fight. We're going to put all our money into school boards. We're going to focus on it. You have to think more broadly in terms of how do we stop misinformation? How do we inoculate our communities against the people who are going to, the snake oil salesmen who are coming in, via online channels and radicalizing people in your community to, push these positions. And it's important that you operate on a local level just with people in your community in terms of what they want. When you talk to people who are fighting these school board fights, who are, people who have never been in politics before, who saw what was happening, and on a personal level decided this is not something that I want in my community. And that's what you have to do, is look at your community and say, what are we going to accept as a group? And you have to organize around that. You have to organize around principles and around what you want out of your community, as opposed to what you're trying to keep from changing that tenor. It needs to be dynamic and it needs to be organic. And I think that, especially in Pennsylvania, we've done, especially in Southeast PA, because we had the most experience with that area, but people here have been spent the last 5 years inoculating themselves against fascism. This is a battleground in terms of elections, in terms of extremism, and people are inculcated in it. They deal with it every day. And for it to come to their school boards is just an extension of what right-wing people following right-wing movements and people organizing for these causes have been telling them is going to come for a while now. And so I think that once it becomes immediate and local, the organizing will come too. But you want to try and be the first person in that door, because like you said, you don't want to try and build up a huge organization to fight one specific thing, because Democrats tried that in the Republican Revolution and it didn't work. Republicans wiped the school boards clean, basically. I think they pulled in 4,000 seats in 4 years. And so we really just need to be focusing on our communities at large and how we can keep them healthy, and how we can make sure that the ideas that are being brought into our school boards are the ones that we actually want, and not right-wing billionaires.
Well said. And I think that, and also remembering on November 3rd, right after these school board elections.
Absolutely. Go vote.
Yeah. I mean, go vote on November 2nd. And then on November 3rd, look around to those people, everyone that's been doing all this organizing. And the next question is okay, what's next for us? And because I do think the affirmative kind of message that you just said there about defining what is it that we want in our communities, right? What are the values that kind of that inform what we're doing? And, it's no longer an abstract question. I mean, it's my kids in their school. It's, the neighbor down the street flying the, don't tread on me flag. I mean, it's here, right?
Exactly.
And
yeah, does it feel local enough yet?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's like, thank God I don't have to deal with it in my house,
Exactly. Yeah, it's in the closet, like, and it's so true, because when you look at progressivism, we're not reactionaries. We don't look for people to fight. We champion causes.
Right.
We develop new ideas. We don't look behind us at who's trailing us and decide to pick a fight with them. If the right wing wants to spend all their money challenging school boards, then we can challenge them with our ideas, and we can challenge them with our organizing power, because our ideas are better and our organizing power is stronger and more grassroots. And if you keep that in focus and you keep the future ahead of you, then you can combat any threat to your community.
100%. Well, let me ask you this before we kind of start getting toward the end, and then we're obviously gonna go to a break a little bit. If anybody wants to call in additional comments, I think Jordan's going to stick around for a little bit afterwards. See if you got something specific for Jordan. So, was in this piece, was there anything when you were kind of digging into it? Were there particular things that stood out as just being like, oh man, this is just like either surprising or just like the golden nugget? Like, I can't believe that this is. Were there those kind of moments in the reporting?
Definitely. It was a little bit like digging out a dinosaur skeleton, when you start to see that it's not just a rock and that all the pieces are kind of connected. Because, for me personally, it was learning that Tony Perkins was the head of the Council for National Policy and also the American Family Coalition, which are both basically the same group. So I was just like, I don't know what I expected there. But, it's those connections that really blow you away. We didn't even get to talk about it. The American Frontline Doctors are 3/4 of their board are Council for National Policy members. It's a scam. It's all a scam.
Well, and I think this is I think we talked about this too last time you were on. It's like that's the right wing kind of media network infrastructure, right? I mean, it's like you build these institutions that are all funded really by a few small organizations, and then they start citing each other and start pointing to each other, using each other as their own kind of research and basis for existence. And again, for people who are not like deep in the weeds and the kind of in the politics of this and tracking the money, it seems like, oh, well, here's this organization over here of doctors, and they're saying that I should, question the effectiveness of vaccines, and this organization over here is citing them too as well as a credible source, and so it's disorienting,
And it adds upon itself because they have no other input. You've created an ecosystem of solely bad ideas that these people are listening to, and then if they ever find their way out of the ecosystem, they have no trust in institutions anymore. The trust in doctors nationwide cratering is going to be a huge issue that we have not reckoned with. 100%. And it's because right-wing groups like this are pretending to be doctors and then selling people horse paste for $90. It's all a part of the plan.
Thank you, Joe Rogan, for your help with that, by the way. Spreading the paste nonsense.
Dude, the horse paste.
The paste.
That guy should be taken off Spotify.
Totally, man. Totally. I mean, come on.
Oh, my God.
God. I mean, the number of people when they said, like, well, I like some of the guests he has on. It's like, like the meme right now, like red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. And
as a guy who's been into podcasts since I was 14 years old, I swear if Joe Rogan ruins them for me, I'm going to have a freak out. I don't know how I'm going to handle it. But like I saw a great, I think it was an Atlantic article that was like how Spotify is ruining podcasts. Yep. And I'm like, it happened. It was always going to happen, but it happened.
Exactly. Isn't that the case though? So, here you go.
The writing ruins everything. I don't know.
I know. Well, so if you got, we had a lot. I mean, look, a lot of folks who listen to our podcast. I mean, we got a lot of folks up here in Bucks, kind of across Pennsylvania, who are kind of embedded in this stuff. And if you had to kind of, give them a message of after you're kind of digging in this stuff, I mean, what would you want them to hear?
Oh man, the people from Bucks County, especially, and from Delaware County and from Montgomery County, all the areas surrounding Philadelphia, just keep whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Oh my God, I've never met a more politically engaged, savvy, smart group of people than the people who are covering Jim Worthington, the people who are covering Steve Lynch, the people who are covering all of these huge issues that because of the death of local newspapers we have no idea about. And there are so many citizen journalists on Twitter and across everywhere who are doing the work that needs to be done in order to save these institutions if we do want to save them. So what I would say is stay loud, stay angry, and stay on point. Just keep doing whatever you're doing because we need you.
Man, I can't think of a better message to leave us on there tonight. And that's absolutely, and I can tell you, I've been doing kind of activist or organizing work or this kind of media work since I was in high school, right? And more often than not, I happen to be within a group of folks. I'm a Gen Xer, right? So I got the giant baby boomers, and you got this kind of little trough of Xers, and then you got the millennials who come afterwards. We're sitting there like, man, we just watched all the industry move away, right? That's our lives, right? It's like,
oh yeah, the most traumatized generation.
Oh my God, right? So often, I'm thinking about our little punk rock crews kind of growing up. We're like, yeah, we're gonna form a collective, and we're gonna do what? What are we gonna do? Like, well, we're gonna bring bands in for number one. And then we're going to try to organize against, I don't know, death squads in El Salvador. Let's see what we can do, right? And it was like, and it was that kind of idea, and always kind of having to push. And even with my own union organizing, with my own union, is like, okay, look, we got to change our model. We got to change our model. What I see is happening around these school boards, exactly as you said, it's like I'm walking into these rooms of people that are already doing astonishing work and have been doing this work for a while now. And it's like, to walk into a room and be like, okay, what little can I contribute? Because you all rock, right?
Absolutely.
It's an awesome place to be.
It's very heartening. And I think that when you see the people who are involved, you have to, even if your group is small, even if there's 10 or 15 people, even if it's just you, you have to think, there's 100,000 other groups just like that doing their important thing. And as long as you think the thing that you're doing is important, then you're making a difference.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to go to the grocery store and buy soup for 99 cents and bring it to a homeless shelter. And that's democracy. You did a good thing there. You have to continue doing that stuff. And it has a considerable impact. I think that what you said about, the Gen X, kind of punk rock activist days, I have a lot of respect for the work that was done in that period. That was a tough time to be an activist, and you live in the Reagan era and everything else afterwards is just kind of in that shadow. But those are people who are, still doing the work today. I went to a meeting and there were people from 5 to 80, and those are the Gen X punk rock activists who are reading Chomsky on the bus. The work is still happening. It never stops. The work never stops.
100%.
So, I think especially because it's so local, people are just like, I need to do something. And I think that, whatever you can do is the best that you can do. And we're happy for the help.
Well, fantastic. Well, Jordan, thank you so much, man, for coming on tonight, man. I've been so much looking forward to this conversation. And I'm always kind of refreshing my page every time I head on over to your website, just to see what you got coming up next. You got, and everybody, I'd encourage you to head on over to Jordan's page. It's www.itsalienmuse.com. That's itsalienmuse.com. There'll be links in today's show notes, so you can check it out there directly. You can follow him on Twitter too at @jhop_PHL. That's @jhop_PHL. Make sure you're following him on your socials, making sure that you're checking out his website, because he's just doing just absolutely bang up reporting down there. And I appreciate you, man, you coming on again tonight.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much for having me. And in the same way, follow RC Press, follow everything they're doing, check out Cyril's. There's so much cool stuff happening. And if you're missing any of it, you're missing out. So definitely give it a look.
100%. Well, listen, I just dropped the link for if anybody wants to have a little call-in. Jordan's going to stick around a little bit after the break. You can click on that link in today's show notes. That'll take you in and be a kind of an audience member on Riverside.fm. Just make sure you remember that you're going to hit the silence button on your YouTube, or just kind of shut down YouTube entirely and log in through Riverside.fm, so you don't get the feedback and you get the delay and all that kind of stuff. Or you can just stick on YouTube and you want to throw some comments in the comment section there too as well. I'll read them out and we'll get Jordan's thought on it. But thanks so much, Jordan, man, and we'll see you on the other side.
Absolutely.
All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for another episode of Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with kind of closing thoughts, your comments, your thoughts. I'm so psyched.
I'll fly away now.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back. It's Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Yes, Jordan has stuck around for afterwards. So if anybody out there in the community, you've got some comments, you got questions, you want to call into the show, the info is right there in the show notes, and I dropped it in the chat. Just make sure you shut off your audio on YouTube, or close YouTube down and just listen in through riverside.fm. We'd love to hear what you got to say. We'll take any questions or comments that you have as we kind of head into the evening hours. I have to say, Jordan and I were just talking a little bit about one of the things, and I'll share with everybody here too, that, what I said to Jordan is like, I appreciate his work so much, because not only the quality of the reporting that we get to see. I mean, seriously, who else is doing this work around here on this stuff? And there, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of people doing this kind of work out there. But I mean, it's like to have a voice like this and put it all and condensed in this way and written in such just a phenomenal way. Great. But what I appreciate so much, and like, seriously, Jordan, I don't know how you keep it up half the time, is like the optimism. Because, I tend to, and, maybe this is my kind of like jaded Gen X kind of history, is that, I tend to, be like that dark cloud in meetings, right? Like walk in, I'm like, okay, I get your optimism, but they're really just screwing us over here, right? And everyone starts going like, oh man. And I appreciate, where you take us, remind us that, look, there's amazing work that's going on, amazing people doing all this stuff. So, I thanks, man.
Absolutely. No, and I think that it's so important, because everyone has those days where they're feeling real doomer about it. And I think that, part of it is the society that you grow up in. I said Gen Xers are the most traumatized generation. It's just, you go through so much with like the financial crisis, 9/11, and it's a lot to go through as a society and still hold on. just like the sheer amount of propaganda that Gen Xers experienced in the lead up to the Iraq War should be the focus of some kind of study. But it's real easy to get caught in that cycle of feeling like everything is always going to be bad. But the history doesn't necessarily, inculcate that, and the future doesn't have to be that way either. The future isn't even here yet. We're already kind of dooming it. I think that's not, it's not bad to pay attention to the dangers and to understand, what could go wrong. But if we're going to pretend to be people who are looking forward instead of reactionaries, it's easier, it's healthier on your brain, and it's more fun to talk about the things that could be good as opposed to the things that might be bad.
I hear you 100%, man. It's like, and that's why I appreciate, the reminder, in a part, and I don't mean to suggest that like, I'm a fatalist or cynic or anything like this. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you on a show like this if I thought it was all doom and gloom, I mean, for whatever reason, like, still holding on to the road, the life raft, and be like, no, I'm going to, like, I have faith, right? I know enough about history and how things have changed is that like it's gonna happen. But there's times it's like, just come on already.
Totally. No, and every movement is those voices too. You don't want to get caught in a perspective where it's like things are great. I don't know what the death camps, the lists, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. You don't want that guy in your movement. Like what you want is like a gruff union dude who will like bring pizzas to the picket, but is also, making dark jokes, because that's just the type of people that we are. Yeah. And I think that's just as critical as, someone who's super bubbly. You need the mix,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Emily says, look, Gen Xers are awesome. So I appreciate that. Emily says, and your kids, the Zoomers, are progressive for the most part. Again, I say, I'll tell you, this is the one thing that's fantastic about teaching is that, I remember when I first started my job at Kutztown, there were, I would hear from people, oh man, it's such a conservative area and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I don't know about that. I mean, like, you're talking about like areas where the steel workers were predominant, right? You're talking about, 45 minutes outside of some of the major textile strikes, right? Where kind of Mother Jones was talking, I mean, like, exactly. And this is like the history of the area. I mean, you had the kind of like anarchist collectives in West Philadelphia, like going back, like, like late 1800s, early 1900s. I mean, stuff like this. I mean, and you can't tell me that there's, there's not the possibility. And it's, once you allow, I think this is what I would say to my colleagues back then. I was like, look, once you allow some of these, these students, right, these kind of young adults come in, just let them tell their stories, right? It doesn't take long for them to go to like, okay, yes, I'm just looking for a job, to kind of getting pissed off and wanting to do something. And that's the hope, man. And it just gets more and more each year. So that's, that's the hope on my end for sure.
Absolutely. There's so much potential energy, even in, people who are boomers, people who are greatest generation, people who you might think are really set in their ways. You sit in a room full of organizers and you can feel the buzz, of ideas and energy and willingness to get things done. And when you talk, like you said, like when you talk to those people, they're not necessarily as right wing as you might imagine. Right. They might have had a lot of bad ideas put in their head. They might have been, dealing with some things in their life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be, fascists forever. We can talk to them and try and understand their perspective. And their problems are the same problems that we're having.
100%.
We just came to different, you just need to be willing to talk and to understand. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be a very good organizer anyway, because who are you really organizing for?
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the first lessons, so I remember when we started doing, I was teaching as an adjunct faculty member down at GW down in DC. And that's when we had the UAW come in. We first started as an independent organizing committee to organize graduate teaching assistants and adjunct faculty members. And I had come in, moved to DC, and then, within, I don't know, a week landed with the right people who were already organizing. It was awesome. And but one of the things that I it took a while to get my head around, right, was that when you're organizing, like ideology is not your goal. Right? It's power. Totally. Right? And,
no, absolutely.
And I remember like having this experience of of going and trying to talk to people. And we would talk with our early organizing committee. We would start talking about how, about theories of capitalism and all this other kind of stuff. And it was really good for us. But when you're going out and talking to people, that's not going anywhere. If you lead with like, let me tell you about late capitalism, then you're like going to get
the door.
Bummer.
Right? No one cares about that.
Right, exactly.
How can I get $5,000 more a year? That's what we want to hear about.
That's exactly it, right? And the same thing came up this past week. Is like, I was having this conversation with some students at Kutztown, and we got talking about COVID and just some of the kind of impacts of COVID, and I'll just in very kind of conversational. And one student after another started chiming up and talking about how, they had these jobs in like food service or, every service sector jobs and all this. And, they stuck it through COVID, right? Worked their butts off, right? And then, a bunch of people kind of left work or they got laid off because there wasn't enough work to go around. And then as business started coming back in, as we keep on hearing the news, they started, had difficulty hiring people back because people are like, I don't know if it's safe to go back, right? And so they started hiring people back at higher wages, without raising the wages of the people who've stuck it through and had been there for years. Dude. And I had these students tell me, it's like, yeah, we started talking to each other and finding out that they're getting paid like $5 an hour more per hour. And so we went and talked to the boss. It's like, hey, like, we want that too. And the boss was like, no. So, we all left. That's
unionizing. They're unionizing right now.
I'm like, are you kidding me? That's awesome. They'd be like, I'm not going to put up with this.
No. And I think that's exactly the thing. I don't think that people want to put up with it anymore. We put them through so much shit in COVID, telling them that they're heroes, telling them that they're essential workers, coming up with all these fancy terms to let them know how much we care. But then the pandemic, quote unquote, ends, right? Because we decided that it ended. And then they're just expected to go back to normal, even though we told everybody that we weren't going back to normal. And so, no wonder that, post-COVID, people are feeling a little bit of dissonance in relation to their jobs. I think that's what you see a lot of the, the strikes and the mass exodus from a lot of positions. People are just tired of it. They don't want to be treated like this anymore. And I think that, that's the very bottom of it.
Yeah, and I think it's happening at every tier. I mean, you mentioned before, about, what the impact is going to be in the medical community and things like this. I look at what is happening in education, and people are just freaking wiped out. I had some of the most positive people that I've ever worked with, who it's been remarkable, their positivity, right? I'm just kind of like, what are you on, half the time, but in a really genuine way. I mean, not
how are you surviving?
Well, yeah, I'm just really positive. And they're I've had these conversations now over the past several weeks. They're just like, yeah, I think I'm done. I just can't do this anymore. And that came after we saw, we had this guy who had a heart transplant, who wanted an ADA accommodation. They denied him, right? And they basically said, no, you either come back in person or you're just going to have to go for an unpaid work. And so, there's some organizing around that and stuff. But then it's also, all these things we start hearing from the bosses, right? From our administrators who are, saying, hey, we're back to pre-pandemic situations, right? Like, are you freaking kidding me? We're all in classrooms with masks on, right?
Nobody, and I don't want pre-pandemic to begin with. My life was shit pre-pandemic.
Exactly.
I wasn't getting paid enough. I didn't have good enough health insurance. That's the situation that millions and millions of people are dealing with every day. And I think that is so radical in the very base meaning of the word, to pull from the root, because everybody in the world saw a bug that you can't even see with your own eyes grind the entire economy to a halt. And that is the most radicalizing thing that can happen to you. I think we're going to continue to see what that means, because I don't even think we have the vaguest idea
I think that's right.
What the next 50, 100 years are going to be like.
I think that's absolutely right. And that's the thing that always gives me hope. And, and I was looking at this, I don't know if you saw this, it was a piece in these times by, was it Maria Solis? So for many, the pandemic was a wake up call about exploitative work. And she goes through and talks about some of the things we were just talking about here. And and she mentions in that piece too, as well, also saying, hey, look, we really don't know where things are going to go from here. I mean, there's a lot of pretending going on right now that we can all get back to the way things were. But that's all it is. It's a big bunch of pretense.
Exactly. We are in the Acme cartoon where the Roadrunner or where Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff. We're like at the phase where he's looking behind him and realizing that the cliff is gone. The drop hasn't even started yet.
Yep.
You know, we are only just realizing now that our world is changing, and that's something that you can look back on other previous world events and feel a very similar tenor. You know, in the aftermath of the world wars, people had no idea what was coming. And that feeling is very much the feeling that I think a lot of people are feeling now. The world just doesn't not change after that happens. It has to.
Yeah. I think well said. Well said indeed.
Yeah.
Oh man. But so you're getting through all this COVID stuff all right at this point?
I'm doing okay. You know, I've been working throughout. You know, I had a brief furlough in the beginning, but you know, mostly just trying to stay alive. I didn't get COVID at all. I got my shots.
Yeah.
And you know, we're just trying to figure out the post. I'm looking for a new job. Like a lot of people, you know, I think a lot of people feel like they deserve to get paid more.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the future. Things are scary and weird, but at the end, they'll probably be less scary and pretty good. I overall feel that way about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as long as you know, go back to some things you mentioned in the first part of the show, right? As long as you stick with your, you know, think about your community, think about what kind of community that you want, that we're kind of like in this together. I don't think I've ever, you know, really understood how important it is just to have certain things like, you know, kindness, finding the little places of kindness, because it's hard. I mean, it's been hard. So. Crazy.
And I think that's, again, another radicalizing aspect of what we've all been through. People realizing that society is kind of important, actually. And the communities that we live in are important. And even though you can live online, it's not the same. You know, I went to a movie last night or 2 nights ago. It was the most fun that I've had in weeks. You know, it's just like getting to be with people is way more important than anything else. And I think that very single thought is going to have huge repercussions. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm going to kind of hold on to that excitement that you've got going forward.
I'm happy to spread it. I've got plenty of it. I've got a hyperfixation disorder. It just keeps coming.
I love it. Well, hey, listen, man, you know, keep up the awesome work. And this has just been a blast. And always, every time I talk to you, I just kind of feel better afterwards and kind of more positive about, you know, the possibilities of organizing and kind of moving forward. So I appreciate the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I had a blast. Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody out there. So listen, for those of you who are still kind of tuning in and kind of listening out, I know that tomorrow at Kutztown University's campus, I mentioned Steve Oros. You know, people who've been listening to our podcast know a little bit about his case on our campus. You got the KU Activists, who's a student organization on Kutztown University campus, is holding a kind of information/rally/protest tomorrow from about 10:30 to, I think it's 10:30 to 1. It's during the kind of open time with changing of classes and stuff. That's going to be the academic on the academic plaza, or I think academic, is that what you call it, academic plaza over there? But it's right on the Kutztown University campus across from Old Main, and basically calling for exactly the kind of stuff that Jordan was just talking about. I'm saying that, look, as a community, right, we have a different version of what it means to care for each other. And it's not just pretending that, you know, it's okay to send people back into the abyss and pretend that they're not going to get COVID or not to take safety precautions. But, you know, to take care of each other. And so do check that out if you're in the kind of Kutztown University area. We're probably going to have some folks on from KU Activists in the coming weeks as a little bit of a, you know, summation of what they're working on. There's also going to be, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but probably next week, we've got some kind of cool announcements about some stuff that's happening at Kutztown too, but I'll just leave that teaser out there and hanging out there. Well, Jordan, listen, have a great evening, man, and keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Kevin. You as well.
All right. Everybody, take it easy. Once again, this is my second good night of the night. Yeah, here we go. Thank you all for tuning in. You know, the chat was awesome tonight. You know, I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. See ya.